Belum, Kak. Oke, bisa.
Okay. Um. Okay, it's loading on my end. Okay. So this session is no longer I would say it's no longer mandatory for you to turn on your camera. You can just turn it off, or you can go for prayers, etc. But if you guys are keen to understand what is the thought process from CAP when we conduct this test, please stay. This is a good opportunity for you to understand the way that we are having in this competition and the exhibition results if you are curious. Okay, this motion is as follows. There is a strategic intent from CAP to choose this motion. The wording might be a bit tricky. This house believes that evil should not be characterized as banal. We chose this motion because we want to ask judges to weigh on, I would say, conceptual and principal ideas that might not be as practical or might not be as tangible as your usual motions that we believe might come up later on in the national competitions. So this is a way for you to practice and refine that skill as well. So decision. It was a closing bench win. First was closing government. Second is closing opposition. Third was opening opposition. And fourth was opening government. I think it's important to note that it was quite a clear decision from CAP, and it was a consensus decision from all five of us. It was a clear debate also, and however, it was above average debate, as you can see in the speaker score. It ranges from lowest at 76 all the way to 83, all are within acceptable range to be utilized in the debate. Okay, oral adjudication and explanation, right? So opening government, what did they contribute? They brought two big things. One, I think the biggest contribution for opening government is the setup, right? When they talked about that, what they mean by evil not being as banal, they describe it in two ways. One is that everyday people are capable of doing extreme evil, and that people are evil due to external drives. They try to picturize this as compliance to the system, compliance to evil orders, external things like, for example, you being hungry. They try to differentiate in two ways. They suggest that evil being banal means that people justify evil action when it happened under bad circumstances, despite not having alternative. So they resort to blame externalities. This is the logical process that they utilize in order to explain the banality of it all, the banality of evil creating harm, right? However, they try to portray them on Goff's side when they mean by evil is not banal. What they want on their end is that people have inherent control over their decisions, a level of agency, and cannot be easily swayed by others, and are accountable to the choices that they make, and therefore can be put accountable for the evil acts that they do. That's why it's important to portray evil as not banal, right? Impacts are twofold. One, they talked about without evil being characterized as banal, people will be more conscious of their actions. And this allows for more accountability for legal actions, like in soldiers of war or in Nazi, for example. And it would, because they don't stop the evil action. But second is that there's an internal realization of self-control in which evil are more conscious, right, of the decisions and the acts that they've done. And therefore, it make people stop and incentivize them to do good because they feel like there's a structural change inside their head and also inside their head that makes them want to realize that they need to make the changes that they should. Opening opposition brought three things. One, they challenged the definition of opening government. They feel like what they have to defend when they characterize evil as banal in opening opposition is that everyone is capable of being evil and thus doing evil actions. This is characterized by people doing evil actions of their own self-interest to advance themselves in the system and take actions based on their own bubble. Second is they talk about evil being characterized as banal is good because people can be more aware that others can be evil. This means being vigilant of their best friends, being vigilant of their friends, and knowing that criminal justice system in and of itself is not enough, and therefore you need to rely on your own vigilance and your own self. And also, acknowledging that everyone is capable of being evil is the prerequisite of understanding that others are capable of controlling their emotion. This is from a co-op to a lot of benefits that governing government tries to bring. And therefore, even when the evil isn't extreme, it's still harmful and therefore needs to be held accountable. They talk then, comparative is that when evil is not characterized as banal, everyone will think they're innocent because they are not that extreme evil person. They do not have the capability to do extreme evil or doing evil things and bad actions. And therefore, it's harder for everyday individuals like henchmen to be held accountable unless it's serious harm because ordinary people aren't labeled as evil. The way it goes, why OO goes above OG is I think it's on the analysis of evil being perceived as banal in OG was explained as people needing more self-control over themselves. While it's clear somewhat that that's the kind of society the opening government wants, opening opposition was able to challenge what's more realistic of evil being perceived as banal. I think opening opposition proves that banality means average people are capable of doing evil things. It's the analysis that I think needs to be credited in the opening half, insofar as opening government is unclear as to what then is why then how is the link back between okay people realizing that they need to stop the evil actions, and how does that interact with the fact that evil are not characterized as banal is still unclear in opening government. It's a clear challenge that comes from opening opposition that I feel like was answered at least on their end. So the tipping point is the characterization becomes the prerequisite to understand the implication of evil is perceived as banal for the impact to manifest on opening government. Explain opening opposition. Second is comparing impact and world building, right? Three ways here. One, how people have incentive to do good. In OG, the analysis of people realizing they can be evil to ensure better internal decision making is proven by OO when they say that evil should not be perceived as banal because the awareness of one's own action is actually because of banality, because everyone can do it. And therefore, it requires OG's benefit, like I said earlier, in order for changes to happen. It ensures accountability happens because the blame wouldn't be shifted to just leaders, like what OG says, but it's more of that without evil being perceived as banal, average people wouldn't be blamed and therefore cannot be held accountable because they say that now that everyone is evil is banal, then everyone can be held accountable. Everyone can be deemed that they are the ones who are capable of committing hard evil crimes. Lastly, is that systems to prevent bad actions or proof that evil being characterized as banal, better systems will be in place. OG analyzed why systems and structure change can be good, but it's unclear as to how the change would happen and how the impact would materialize. In opening opposition, they try to claim that when evil is characterized as banal and everyone can do it, and therefore the systems would somewhat be put in place in order for any of those changes to manifest on OO. I think it's important to note here, right? There might be questions of whether OG brought the wrong stance. We don't think so. We think that OG focuses on the wrong aspect of the motion, but as they pick and choose as to what part of the motion they want to debate, but not as a whole. They talked about, the motion wants to talk about whether evil should be perceived as something that normal people can do and whether the motivation can exist in anyone. But OG only focuses that the motivation exists externally instead of focusing on the perspective of a normal person being evil and whether that should or should not be characterized as such. While it is the main focus of the motion, it's not the main focus of the motion. They did try to claim benefits somewhat that when not everyone is perceived as evil, and when everyone shoved it to external factors, why that's good or bad. It can work. It's just not a strategic stance in and of itself in the motion, but it's not wrong. It's something that you can carry as an OG, I guess. So closing government's contribution, right? They talk about two things. One, a recontextualization of banality in government's case. They talked about how evil should be characterized as extraordinary. That's why it should not be something that everyone can do. If evil is perceived as banal, it means that evil acts can be justified due to its normalcy. This will reduce the threshold of evil and cause it to be more frequent. The process analysis that comes from them that we need to credit is how, without evil being perceived as banal, is when evil is perceived as banal, more evil is likely to happen. So the process of normalizing your own evil thoughts to satisfaction resulting into acting on more evil. People will stop trying to control their harmful intentions and behavior as they become desensitized with evil because it's something that everyone can just do. Second, When evil is not characterized as banal, individuals understand that they have an evil thought or desire. It is not normal to have. So they would more likely to stop those evil thoughts and stop those evil actions because they feel like not everyone is capable of being evil. So when I have the thoughts, I need to stop it. I need to make sure it doesn't arise. That's how people would regulate themselves. That's how then um, good behaviors would not rely on the criminal justice system. They would just rely on the concept of morality which in each individual have. How do we weigh that? Closing government versus opening bench. Versus OG, I think closing government is to be credited for bringing the more realistic analysis that's relevant to why evil should not be characterized as banal. Insofar as OG's portrayal is reliant on even acts happening under bad circumstances, compared to CG that proves that the harm of banality of evil happened regardless of circumstance, because it's a more universal scenario that is not reliant on example or reliant on the very specific circumstances the opening government brought. But even more damaging is opening government was unclear in materializing the impact insofar as they never explained why this evil act why when evil is not characterized as banal, people hiding behind the system would be held accountable. I think closing government provides the explanation when they break down the thought process of how evil acts manifest through process of generating satisfaction that I think was not answered at all in opening government. So the gap that OG has was explained in closing government because at least closing government was able to characterize how does the interaction between individuals' perception to the characterization of evil not being banal would look like, and therefore materializing a lot of impact from closing government. Second is how evil people perceive evil and how it results into their actions, right? OG was able to prove that people need to realize that actions are bad within their control. But CG goes a step further through describing not just the realization, but why it would stop individuals from committing evil acts. It's unclear in opening government as to how realization could result into the moral correctedness that they would have insofar as they would correct themselves when they realize they're committing bad things. But on closing government, because the extraordinariness of it and distinguishedness of it that I think was clear in closing government, there's that internal alarm that comes about when you have a bad or evil thought. And therefore, the weighing here that CG is the one who proves why this exclusively because of the characterization of banal and why then it needs to stop. Question, right? How should we evaluate CG clarifying the motion and should we say it's knifing? It's not, because it's still a horizontal extension of why evil is banal means that everyone is involved. But the framing from OG stops at explaining that it might put accountability and consciousness and mindfulness as impact, right? But CG extends by talking about the thought process that comes from interacting with characterization, and therefore it's valued as portraying the likelihood of the debate better. So that's why I think it's not knifing. If anything, it nuances the debate and extends further and better versus OG. How do we compare then CG versus OO? Two things. One, CG pointed out that accountability on OO is under the assumption that it happens due to random external occurrences because everyone can do it, but only some do. The likelihood of accountability in OO is questioned due to unclear analysis as to how you can relate it back to government or other people, given that the occurrence happens in random situations like at lunch or etc. It means that comparatively in CG, they're clearer in how accountability mechanisms happen due to the portrayal that because this is so extraordinary and so weird and distinguished, it would stand out. And therefore, people would more likely to question themselves or question others when thoughts of evil comes about or actions of evil comes about. So this is the likelihood analysis that we feel like was taken down by CG because when asserting the importance of why the external label allows individuals out to point out evil better, it curbs that effort and that likelihood of evil acts to come about, at least in closing government, to take down over OO. Second, CG is able to explain the process of how evil actions can be prevented better than OO through clearer portrayal of incentive structure. OO was right to point out that there could be a benefit of vigilance and accountability to people with no malicious intent to the characterization of evil as banal. But CG was able to break down how the characterization could impact internal decision making and why then it rewards certain behaviors better than others. The portrayal of habit goes above OO insofar as OO never explained, right, why innocent people should be suspected of doing evil things, or how society would be made clear as to how no malicious intent does not equate to no harm. Lastly, right, CO's contribution. CO brought three things. Evil needs to be characterized as banal, this extended point of view of selfish actions and court of law. So the perception of yourself, individuals know they have potential for evil and therefore create better internal check and balance, or the perception of society, how everyone also assumes others have the chance to be evil and therefore will be more preventive. Second, systems to mitigate evil, such as criminal justice system and court of law, can only happen when society agrees on the definition of evil and therefore create a mitigatory system to cater to the agreed definition. They'd say that the definition of evil can only happen when everyone is capable of doing evil things, and that's why evil needs to be characterized as banal. Third, without evil being characterized as banal, people would debate on what is actually evil, and therefore they want to be held accountable, and social advancements won't have check and balance at the end of the day. How do we compare, right? CO versus OG. Two things. One, CO was right to point out that OG's point of change requires the establishment analysis of how an act can be perceived as evil. Insofar as OG only frames that evil is characterized as banal, they say that it's misused to clear people's conscience when they're doing a bad thing. But CO strategically questioned this, right? So it becomes unclear in OG how this impact could materialize when the societal consensus of what evil looks like in OG is never explained. CO even went one step further by proving that perception of morality and what is evil requires the admittance that all humans are capable of being evil first, and therefore it will ensure that preventive methods are in place. And therefore, when acts of evil arises, they're able to curb that actual acts in the end of the day. But second, they also talked about they want to co-opt OG's goal of achieving self-control, right? They want to talk about how a structured system of check and balance could happen better in CO. They countered OG's case by proving that less people will be held accountable if evil isn't perceived as something average people would do, and therefore disproving the impacts of good structural changes that OG wants. But second, comparing with OG's analysis of self-control that was somewhat unclear in the process as mentioned earlier, CO flipped that, right? Saying that the way to achieve self-control is when you implement it in a system and structured process, like school, where you have a sense of guilt from yourself that you're capable of evil. All of that can only happen when you assume that evil is banal and everyone is capable of doing that, and therefore the system could be implemented in place. CO versus OO, right? Analysis of how evil is characterized as banal is only crystallized in CO. OO was contingent on that there's a variety of evilness that needs to be acknowledged, but CO was able to prove why evil needs to be portrayed as banal to understand that everyone's capacity of evil needs to be considered. The impacts, and I think this is the biggest point, is that CO was able to crystallize a lot of impact from OO that was previously loosely explained in opening opposition. They talk about three things. One, how systems are set in place when society collectively agrees that evil is to be avoided when everyone has potential. Second, analyzing on an internal evaluation metric in CO was able to prove the likelihood of behavior changes that OO wanted to bring. And even though OO asserted that people have to be wary of others as evil has a chance to do evil, CO explained what this is to create better social cohesion, taking one step further in terms of impact as to why then that is in and of itself is good. So, small point here. I think it's important on how we measure team derivativeness and if CO and OO is a valid form of horizontal extension, understanding that the flow of logic could be somewhat similar. I think in this debate, CO was able to portray the likelihood of analysis better and also crystallize a lot of characterization better. Insofar as, yes, OO tries to bring similar points of how when we see that everyone has capability of being evil, then there are lots of evaluation that would happen. There's lots of suspicion and vigilance that would happen, and response on crime might be similar. What CO brought here is more crystallized characterization insofar as they picturize the structural process of how then the systems could be in place. They talked about why then the impact of suspecting everyone might do evil things result into a new impact of social cohesion and all of those things. In this specific debate, CO was able to crystallize a lot of characterization and crystallize a lot of impact that in OO was not quite clear, and therefore we need to credit that from CO as opposed to OO. Lastly, right, CG versus CO. Two takes. Why CG1 is because they create stronger preventive mechanism for evil irrespective of existence of external criminal justice system. So CO's argument of preventive harms of evil why preventive harms of evil might happen comes from two things, right? One, control of human selfishness, and two, how it's shaped, society is shaped through the understanding of potential evil of individuals, resulting in a lot of tough on crime stances. But CG was able to frame how the only mechanism that applies to everyone is through solid moral identity that want to distinct themselves from extraordinary acts of evil. Insofar as they explain there will be guilt, this is a clearer process of how individuals interact with characterization and how control will materialize better. Comparatively, in closing opposition, it's unclear, right? It's clear that the system would be in place, and it's clear that there would be some sort of guilt instilled in the system towards individuals, but it's unclear as to how individuals would want to interact with the characterization and how then the impact towards the individual's thought process would materialize. And therefore, the argument defeats CO in two ways. One is scale of impact, with the assumption that the criminal justice system would still be there anyway in closing government. But two, process analysis of comparatively, it's unclear of how CO will interact with the system that CO describes. Second, closing opposition's argument on tough on crimes was not as properly linked back to how it will impact current status quo. Well, closing government's argument on correction happens regardless of criminal justice system, right? So CO was right to analyze that how we characterize evil shaped our stance on crimes. But CO never proved why existing CJS would have impacted existing criminal justice system, and therefore it's fair for closing government to assume current CJS would be sufficient to be additional corrective mechanism to understanding that evil is not penal. But further, closing government was able to point out in order for crimes to be seen as important, the element of extraordinariness must be present as a form of distinguishment for individuals to point it out as a fear. Insofar as correction happens, I think closing government was right to say that the fact that individuals would want to correct themselves, correct others, and there is a criminal system allows for a stronger link back towards why then crimes would be curbed in the end of the day. In closing opposition, it's unclear, right, how then it's clear that it might shape how evil is perceived in society, but it's unclear how the characterization of it all would interact with current criminal justice system and how then it would make individuals would want to want to curb evil thoughts at the end of the day, at least compared to what we get from closing government. So yeah, that's the explanation of the OA. I think we can do some questions first, or yeah, before we move to speakers.
Or maybe we can just go with speaker score dulu, Kak. Jadi Q&A-nya bisa digabung, Kak?
Boleh, boleh, boleh. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Kyle Gard, for all of the explanation about the weighing. So just briefly, guys, I want to explain the speaker scores. As you guys can see over here, we already explained that it was very clear to the CAP that it was an above average debate, and the decision is already stated here, but we'll immediately go into detail why a specific speaker or individual got that speaker range. Okay, next. Right, so just a general overview on how to score speakers, right? So first, what you have to do is that you need to start from a ceiling point. So when you think about which team won the overall debate, who got placed first, you start from that team on how to actually score the individuals, and then you rank them on the second, third, and fourth. So this is going to make it very easier for all of you to understand the margins between teams and between speakers. And we just want to note down that even if one team won, that does not mean that both speakers have to have a high scores, which is why we are noting down about the importance of margins. As long as there is a difference between the total speakers, that can be evaluated as who got first, second, third, and fourth. And that's why we also want to pinpoint why it's so important to refer back to the scoring criteria. It's totally normal. It is very allowed to open up the judge manuals whenever you are scoring the debate. Next. Right, so immediately to CG. So this is how we are going to evaluate from the first till fourth. So specifically on CG, let's just revise on what MG brought out, right? what we got from MG was that there is a clear process analysis and portrayal of the arguments. So they were able to explain the threshold of evil and how it leads to more evil actions. That is the process analysis that we wanted, compared that was missing from OG, right? So this was very strong, specifically on MG, and they also provided strong responses, right? So it was weighed against MG. So, for example, the analysis of how you have self-awareness of evil only after you think evil is banal was credited to MG, and this proves that MG's speech can be credited in the range of 80 till 81 because their case stands against strong rebuttals even then. Now let's compare to the GovWhip, right? Still from the same bench. So what we got from GovWhip was excellent weighing against other teams. They were highly credited, mainly because of the reason that they were able to provide strong responses to tackle other teams' cases. This is a very important role fulfillment from a GovWhip, right? And they were able to explain the framing on what the debate is actually based on, which is morality, which is why this solidified what is the team identity for CG. Now, we just want to highlight the reason why GovWhip is scored higher than MG was that the clear case brought by MG was properly weighed by GovWhip. So this is why there is a clear 1 till 2 margin. So even if the case was brought by MG, the fact that GovWhip is the one that weighed that argument compared to other teams, and then that was the one that revealed why the purpose of morale was important within the debate. That is why most of the credit is given to GovWeb, and that's why there is a strong, like a big margin compared to the two speakers. Next. Right, next is CO, which placed second, specifically on MO. So what we got from MO was that there were a lot of strong assertion, right? So this is specifically towards CO, but unfortunately, it wasn't mechanized or is proven to be able to credit on its own. So even if there were a lot of arguments coming from the first speaker of CO, because they were not able to mechanize it, they were placed or given a lower score range. And something to note down here, everyone, based on the judge manual that we already explained yesterday, you have to penalize if speakers do not take a POI, right? However, MO is not penalized for going over time. So if you guys noticed during the judge test, when they went over time 7 minutes, 20 seconds, just because they didn't notice the timer, that does not mean that you can penalize them. But something that is important is the fact they did not take a POI, and that proved to us that the persuasiveness in your speech was not strong enough because you could not take a POI. Now, compared to OpWeb, what we got was that there were more clarifications on OpWeb. So the reason why they were higher than MO was because they proved the entire of their case was talking about human perception and prevention of evil. This was clarified on OpWeb's speech. So on top of that, there were strong engagements to the rest of the teams. Again, the role of whip speakers is to provide strong responses and weigh their own argument towards other teams, right? And because they were able to fulfill that role, that's why they are heavily credited as a strong contribution. So if you guys can see, the reason CO's case was clear, it stemmed from OpWeb. So even if MO was the one that explained a lot of arguments, if there was no proper link back, if there was no proper weighing why your argument is mechanized and therefore should weigh above other teams, unfortunately, it's a bit difficult to achieve like a higher speaker score. But fortunately, OpWeb was the one that was able to crystallize all of the prerequisite, therefore crediting CO's argument. That's why there's a clear margin of 4 till 5 speaker scores between MO and OpWeb. Next. Right, so OO placed third in this debate. So specifically on LO, while the arguments were able to prove OO's case, unfortunately it was based on examples and specific scenarios. Kyle Gard already explained the examples that were brought up by LO specifically. Unfortunately, without proper elaboration, this is just an assertion, right? But DLO explained and elaborated that the context from DLO should be credited. So the fact that they were able to extend why DLO's examples solidified OO's case. So if they were able to prove why all of those examples are important within the debate and they were able to link back to the burden of the motion, the credit goes to that speaker. And on top of that, DLO gave a clear comparison towards OG. They were the one who provided strong rebuttals. They were able to weigh OO's entire case over OG. So because of that, you need to credit DLO higher than LO. So this is something that judges need to note down, even if even if one speaker has a really strong point, that does not automatically mean that both teams have to have the same high speaker range. Be very thorough on which speaker was able to prove something. And in this case, it was DLO that really elaborated why all of the things that LO brought was linked to the burden of the motion. And that's why the credit should be given to DLO and not LO, even if they were the one who explained the examples. Now, lastly, going to OG. OG placed fourth in this debate. So specifically on PM, right? We can credit the logic behind PM's arguments. Unfortunately, it lacked process analysis. So PM's case makes sense, but if everyone notices, there was a lot of jumpy processes. That was the entire conclusion that we got from PM. And that's why their speaker range is 76 till 77. Now, going on to DPM, the clarification on OG stance was brought by DPM. They were the one that extended on accountability, and therefore they were able to weigh and respond to LO, right? This is exactly why DPM is scored above, because they were able to fulfill their burden, the fact that they can respond towards LO, and they were able to further extend their first speaker's arguments. Now, something to note as well is DPM is penalized for not taking any POIs. Again, as a judge, you need to be fair and square, right? If a speaker did not take a POIs, any POIs, then that should be implemented to all teams. It should not only be penalized, oh, because they're closing teams, you have the bigger burden to accept POIs because you're speaking last. No, that should not be the rule. The rule is that if any speaker did not take any POIs, then you have to penalize through their speaker scores, and it should be individually. It should not be team-based, right? So that is something you need to note down. And lastly, what we want to note down is the fact that DPM actually scores above LO. So if you guys noticed, the speaker score, DPM is 77 till 78. However, LO is 76 and 77. Even if LO is on the third position as OO, you still have to weigh their individual role fulfillment. The fact that DPM was able to engage with LO's very specific scenario arguments and flip the logic, the credit should be given to them. So again, guys, when you score individuals or speakers, really assess on what their individual role fulfillment is based on their position. You should not penalize the entire team, and you should really be thorough whether they were able to extend the debate. And second of all, whether they were able to crystallize something. If something was made clear of because of a specific speaker, then you should credit that speaker and not the entire team. But again, what we want to highlight is when you total all of the speaker scores, it should reflect the one who is first, second, third, and fourth. Okay, so be careful not to input scores that will lead to a tie. So be very clear on the margins. Yeah. So that is all for the explanation for individual speaker scores. Now we're going to give some time for everyone to ask, about the debate exhibition and the reasoning. You can feel free to send the questions through the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself, feel free to do that.
I have a question regarding the speaker score. Should we also give the speaker score in our OA?
No, we've already answered that in the
No.
previous chat.
Yeah.
Um, you do not give the speaker score in your OA. Speaker score is confidential. You are not allowed to share it as well until after the tournament is done. So in the tournament, you are not allowed to share speaker score at all, not in your OA, not after your OA at all. So Karina answers.
All right. Any other questions?
We're going to set a time until maximum of 9 p.m. Waktu Indonesia Barat, as it's already 11 p.m. for our friends who is located in Waktu Indonesia Timur. So we have 6 minutes if you have any questions.
All right. If there's no questions, I think all is clear. Okay. Um, we can wrap up early, I think, if no one is keen to ask any questions. We'll share to you the recording. We will share to you the presentation as well for you to look over, and we'll share to you the YouTube link for you to rewatch the exhibition debate again if you want. But all in all, good luck for NUDC and see you in Purwokerto. Thank you, guys.